Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Industries Live. We're streaming live on the AWS partner channels, and we're actually, speaking of live, we are monitoring the chat. So if you're in the chat, please tell us where you're live tuning in from. I'm broadcasting from Chicago. What this show is, Industries Live, is a show where we talk to really interesting industry partners that are building industry-specific solutions that run on AWS and address those concerns of folks in the industry, and we get to hear fascinating insights about what they're seeing within the industry and how they're leveraging AWS technologies to help address those opportunities and challenges. My name is Jason O'Malley. I'm a senior partner solutions architect. I'm part of our industry partner strategy team, and I am here with my co-host, Addy, who leads our financial services partner team. Addy, would you like to say hello?
Thanks, Jason. Hey, everyone. I'm Addy Dubhashi. I lead our industry solutions for financial services, and I've been with AWS for 7+ years. What's always exciting about this conversation is when we really talk about how our partners' capabilities combine with AWS to solve for industry use cases. So we're not talking about simple technology aspects or infrastructure. We're talking about line of business use cases, key decisions that business owners need to make, and how our systems are able to support them to achieve those goals. As part of our journey, we often kind of talk about the AWS solution, how it's really well constructed, and we can very much get into some examples today. So I'm really excited for our first conversation with the Fireblocks team. Looking forward to me speak with Stephen.
That's great. And maybe we'll welcome Stephen on now and dive into it. Stephen, welcome to our show. It's great to have you on. And Stephen, would you like to give the viewers a little bit of an introduction of yourself and Fireblocks?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on today. My name is Stephen Richardson. I'm our Chief Strategy Officer and Head of Banking at Fireblocks. Fireblocks is a digital asset infrastructure platform. Really at our core, what we do is we provide wallet capabilities and technology that power every type of digital asset operation. We've been around since 2019 and have grown pretty significantly since that time, servicing north of 2,400 enterprise customers within the digital asset space, traditional financial institutions, FMIs, fintechs, and payments providers. And what we're really excited about doing is working with our customers globally to one, engage with the blockchain and this new technology application, but two, build real significant and high utility products and services that leverage this technology to make things better for their customers, but also to really innovate within the broader financial services space. So very excited about that. I've been with the Fireblocks team for 6 years now. Joined pretty early in the process. I met Michael, our CEO and one of our co-founders, early in the process of him creating the company and the application of Fireblocks, and just really enjoyed this journey so far.
That's fantastic. Stephen, you've actually been part of this very exciting journey, all from the way that blockchain's scope and potential was getting assessed by the wider industry to the waves of what plays out in the cryptocurrency world. But all of that, translating into true enterprise-grade adoption that's taking place today. Tell us a little bit about your journey. How did it start? How did you come about this? And what's that journey been with Fireblocks?
Yeah, look, for me, I previously was a consultant with Accenture, focused on financial services. And what was really interesting was to kind of be in the nitty gritty of understanding how people were building different services and applications for financial services. I then took a bit of a step out and worked for a fintech company that acted as a settlement and clearing bank for digital assets in 2016, 2017, right? And so what we were developing at that time was there were global exchanges around the world, and there were significant market makers within the space, but they were each taking pretty significant counterparty risk to each other, right? I think we started off in the FX space and then got contacted by one of our customers around, could we basically enable settlement for digital assets? At the time, we acquired a banking license. And what we did was we had a non-rehypothecating bank. So we held funds in full reserve to enable our customers to settle between each other. And so at that point in time, in about 2017, 2018, we onboarded a few market makers and a few exchanges. And we would allow the exchanges or the market makers to post collateral in dollars, in physical fiat, and then settle against crypto exchanges globally in places like Korea, in the Far East, in the US, um, kind of mitigating the counterparty risk associated with those transactions. So a market maker didn't have to necessarily pre-fund their transaction to exchange, given that money movement at that point in time in 2017, 2018, the crypto exchanges was quite difficult. They could actually post funds with the company I was working with, and then settle on a post-trade basis. And then during that period around 2017, 2018, we then started to see the rise of stable coins that were basically leveraging or being leveraged to settle on-chain assets. So things like Bitcoin against a digital dollar, like Tether. And that was just like a really interesting moment in the space, right? Because you started to see what we're seeing in the traditional financial services space, which were assets that were existing on the blockchain and being utilized, but then funds that were sitting off blockchain, right? And needing to be settled. And that's where our bank came in. But then all of a sudden, about 2017, 2018, you started to see assets being settled against money that was also on chain. And what we actually did was bank one of those stablecoin providers, right? And so, that to me was like just a very interesting kind of like paradigm shift in terms of seeing kind of on-chain DVP and the ability for funds to be settled, leveraging the blockchain. And that was kind of where things got started for me in terms of like my broader interest. And about 2018, I met Michael because we wanted to explore the idea of being able to custody both the digital asset, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the stablecoin, and basically create a full stack bank at that point in time. And one of the things we realized at that moment in time was that settlement and really transacting in real time was quite difficult, right? And at that point in time, Michael was developing a solution that basically would solve that problem inherently, by allowing kind of a scalable infrastructure that could be built for moving assets in real time, but also was highly secure. And so to me, that was just like something I hadn't seen in the space. Like at that point in time, you were seeing, digital asset vaults that were being built in bunkers or in mountains in Switzerland, that required you to go in and were completely air gapped and just very slow, right? So you could only do settlements maybe once or twice a day. And then you have this alternative that was coming into the space that was saying, we can be just as secure, but we can enable you to have a scalable infrastructure that's built on the cloud and that's built to be kind of leveraged more broadly speaking, that would enable like real-time settlements and enable like a more active settlement basis for financial activity. And so to me, that became just like a really interesting thesis to look at, and was able to join the team pretty significantly pretty soon after.
That's interesting. I'm coming from a different industry, so just hearing about the mountain secure vaults and such.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be pretty crazy, to be pretty honest.
Much more palatable on this side of it. So I was curious to so some of our audience will not be as familiar, or this is a little bit new to them because we do have audience attendees that are from all different types of industries.
Yep.
But it's always great to see some of those trends you're seeing within that. I'm curious. So with stable coins being that topic that many are talking about, and as you look at the sort of digital asset stablecoin ecosystem, how are you seeing like those changes? You mentioned sort of that vault and classic way, but any other changes you're seeing that's sort of evolved more recently?
Yeah, look, I think you can kind of look at what we're seeing in the digital asset space as kind of like three distinct waves, right? I think the first wave was this idea of like cryptocurrencies, right? So this view that an asset could be represented or value could be represented on the blockchain, right? And so that could be Bitcoin, Ethereum, other cryptocurrencies, and basically that was like a validation that in essence the blockchain could act as an information source, but also as an asset repository, right? And value could be exchanged from a wallet to wallet basis. I think what you then started to see more recently is this idea of stablecoins, which is that money can be represented and be put on chain, right? And so for the first time, if you think about like from a broader use case perspective, you have this idea of money that's moving at a P2P basis or a wallet to wallet basis without this idea of like intermediaries, right? And which is like a fundamental change in kind of like broader financial services, right? And so, this idea that money is coming on chain, both in like a tokenized deposit basis for a lot of like traditional banks, but also in a stablecoins basis for, e-commerce platforms, fintechs, and non-banking, partners. Believe that became a really interesting paradigm shift. And basically you had this validation that basically an asset on chain could be settled with money on chain, right? And so that became like the first like significant proof point, right? And what you're then starting to see is that how do stablecoins come into play to create utility for corporates and retail consumers alike, right? How do they enable remittances to occur between different geographies and different countries? How do they enable corporates to enable payouts to their customers more seamlessly on a 24/7, 365-day basis? Because you have this monetary representation on chain that can be utilized within the ecosystem, right? And that can be settled or utilized for other real tangible goods, right? And so that is like kind of where we are, like I'd say currently in the journey. And so now that you've proven that the asset can come on chain and you've now proven that money can come on chain, then the third thing are, how do you bring traditional financial assets on chain? And that's where you see this idea of like RWAs or real world assets that get tokenized and be brought on chain. And I think you're going to see this combination between stable coins and tokenized deposits that represent money on chain being settled with these traditional financial assets that then create kind of a new financial services paradigm, right? And the question really becomes, do those happen with intermediaries like banks and traditional financial institutions? Do they happen with fintechs? Do they happen with non-financial corporates? That is what's still being evolved. And that's, the exciting part of where we are in the space right now. And so I think with the kind of clarity with a lot of the regulation we're seeing with, companies, large fintechs, and payments providers that are leveraging stablecoins to build infrastructure and products for corporates and SMBs, and then banks that are starting to step into this space that are acting as on-ramps and off-ramps and leveraging tokenized deposits. I think you're seeing this really interesting kind of, I'd say, journey and experimentation towards real commercialization around, on-chain assets right now.
Yeah, absolutely, Stephen. I mean, we're seeing, starting with the journey of, hey, you can connect a asset to the blockchain, to the adoption of stablecoin structures, all the way to tokenization, which is truly going to transform financial instruments. We've also seen over the past 2 years, regulators have published sufficient number of papers. You're seeing acts and rapid acceleration in the way that these proposals are being approved. Europe with MICA, the Genius Act getting approval in the US, and the Clarity Act progressing. I mean, you really have a supportive structure from the regulators to get going and bring in these efficiencies. Because, I mean, thinking about the counterparty risk, the latency and the delays that it would take to do an FX transaction. And once you consider stable coins, you really democratize access to the strength of that respective currency. So what are some of the questions that you get from customers today? They're obviously learning this journey. You've been on it for some time. But specifically, what are conversations like when a customer's assessing a stablecoin wallet and Fireblocks overall for specific applications like custody or storage of stablecoins, but all the way to kind of cross-chain linkage or smart contracts and tokenization? What are some of the questions they often come to you with?
Yeah, look, I think that I can kind of talk about them in three ways, right? The first is, do you have the technological capability to engage in the space, right? Because for traditional financial institutions, less so for fintechs and others, they've generally operated within a permissioned ecosystem, right? You operate within, pretty confined lines of, other bank-to-bank partners, systems that are only accessed by banks and other centralized intermediaries. And now you're looking at basically operating within the blockchain on a non-recourse basis, right? And so the question is, what are like the technical capabilities, wallet infrastructure, governance infrastructure, policy infrastructure that need to be put in place? And do I have the teams, both on the technical side, but also on the operational side, to be able to manage my interaction with this new technology and this new ecosystem, right? And so I think from a Fireblocks perspective, what we try to do is provide capabilities and infrastructure out of the box that simplify that technology basis that people have to think about, right? And so I would say like that's like the first major question, like, can I actually do this, right? Do I have the operational expertise? Do I have the technical expertise to be able to do this? I think the second question that we start to see is, what's the risk associated with this, right? You know, there's a lot of like conversations around things like fraud, compliance risk, AML. You know, how do we mitigate, you know, both as a regulated institution, but also as a non-regulated institution that is interacting with money, right? Dollars, and basically there can be some really negative consequences if you enable, money laundering, fraudulent activity, or kind of money going to sanctioned parties. How do I mitigate the risk around that? And I think we try to provide a lot of clarity in terms of you can do so from a governance and a policy perspective. But two, right, there's a lot of transparency with other providers and technological capabilities that can be embedded at a technological level within like a solution stack. Those can be things like Chainalysis and Elliptic for like KYT. They can be things like Nota Bene for travel rule. They can be governance engines that we provide as from Fireblocks out of the box. But even on the basis of just like interacting with smart contracts, the capabilities around smart contracts have developed quite significantly in such a way where you can really start to mitigate a lot of risk. So when you put all of these things together, you can really create a pretty comprehensive risk framework that kind of, I'd say, dampens some of the like concern, like compliance risk that like these firms may have, right? And then I think the third and the most important is, how do you monetize? Like, what does it really look like to drive value? I think there's always been this thesis around like crypto as like highly speculative assets that are highly volatile. And there's questions around, do you want to enable folks to have access to that? But I think with stablecoins, you're starting to see a new case around like real utility, right? How do you make payments faster? How do you make payments cheaper? You know, for example, if you're a supplier in an emerging economy, right? Today, your payments terms generally against the buyer would be T plus 30, you know, in a lot of instances. Now imagine you're able to get paid out in T plus 1 or T plus 2, right? If you're a gig economy worker on a platform, and typically you're taking 5 to 6 days to get settled out in cash, but now you have the option to take a stable coin instantaneously for the work that you do, and then connect to an off-ramp partner to get that into fiat, right? There's some real value and tangible value there for customers, and for banks and other traditional players, there's value in providing the on-ramps and off-ramps to get into stables and to provide like wallet and custodial capabilities that enable people to have a really strong UX UI experience with this new technology and with these new assets. And so when you start to think about what that looks like, then there's really some interesting commercial opportunities that exist. And I think that's why you've seen such an emphasis on things like stablecoins between, you know, payments providers. You've seen stablecoins coming out as a basis of what people are doing on the banking space, because there is this real commercial opportunity and there's real disruption that's happening in the space at the time. So I think you'll then start to see more alternative assets come onto the blockchain. And then I think you'll see this like entirely circular ecosystem where people can, you know, get into a stable, can buy alternative assets or assets that are on chain, can hold a stable to minimize volatility within their own domestic currencies. And then I think you'll start to see things like on-chain FX, where you have multiple stables being introduced by different countries, and those can get settled on-chain to enable kind of a more efficient movement of money. So I think that's the exciting part. You know, everything goes from like the technology to the risk to then the commercialization. And I think, you know, our job is to try to answer those questions and provide solutions to our customers.
That's fantastic. I just so much to unpack there, Stephen. And I just had kind of a few thoughts on some of your comments, right? At AWS, we very much advise our customers to focus on what's most relevant to their business. And AWS abstracts the undifferentiated heavy lifting. So you don't have to worry about your compute or your storage or the way that your systems are networked for resiliency. And Fireblocks actually has that same point of view and philosophy, which is, you know, if you need to build those stablecoin wallets and you need that resilient infrastructure set up in order to make most of those efficiencies you called out, you really want to make sure that you deploy these seamlessly and it's already pre-configured for you. It actually brings up to a very important point, which is, one of the reasons folks Fireblocks has deployed on the AWS marketplace is exactly that, which is a customer, a bank, a credit union, those who would like to participate in this rapidly evolving space, you actually get an opportunity to deploy almost seamlessly via marketplace. So it's all about getting started. The integrations of the systems, the configuration for financial services has been pre-validated and it's up there on AWS Marketplace. But the last part of what you said, Stephen, is super interesting, which is there's going to be a cost of not acting. So when an institution or a payment player is not fully embracing these technologies and is not leaning in, you're going to have this first wave where, all right, not too much changes. And a few years go by and you've already started losing out both on the speed and efficiency gains that others have gained, but also on the analytics and the learning and the organizational knowledge that grows from kind of diving in. And so it's so important to get started and just begin that journey, however complex it may seem at the start. But I was at Money 2020, just last week, and a massive number of conversations around these topics. So really, I'm seeing that buzz both from the payments and banking partners and customers alike.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm curious too, Stephen, so you're at this interesting intersection where you're in this exciting new space, but you're, leveraging trusted AWS infrastructure and such. I'm wondering, could you talk to us a little bit about like how does your team able to like pull those AWS infrastructure components together? What role do they play in the solution?
Yeah, look, I think when we think about our partnership with AWS, right, it's firstly, AWS provides key components within the Fireblocks architectural stack, right? We run a significant number of our platform on AWS infrastructure to, support everything from, kind of our front end gateways through like our blockchain node infrastructure, as well as things like our backup and disaster recovery, right? So we've built a lot of like our broader capabilities leveraging AWS. In addition, I think when we talk about the marketplace, we enable our customers to basically develop flexible deployment models leveraging AWS, right? So they can run things within their own environments. They can use, trusted computing with like Nitro enclaves for basically secure compute around, a lot of like the more vulnerable components within our stack, especially from a cryptographic level. And then really we've deployed a lot of the things like the cosigners and things that are necessary to have this overall like architectural solution around wallet infrastructure through AWS in a very scalable way, right? And so for us, it's really been a very strong partnership that we've been able to build, but we've been able to then extend that out to our customers in a very seamless way, right? And we've been able to, develop toolkits and templates, right, based off of the architecture that we run ourselves, but then extending it out at a level where clients can run it within their own cloud instances or within their own, basically environments at AWS. And so I think for us, that's what makes it exciting. That's what simplifies a lot of like the complexity of this process. And I think that's why we've been able to partner together so well.
Agreed. And obviously our famous saying is like, security is the number one priority. And so it's just, it makes sense that it fits into this kind of scenario as well of just building on those same security fundamentals that people depend on when they're trusting those very important assets. Yeah,
absolutely.
I just want to shout out to the folks in the comments. Thank you for logging in. Really appreciate the global folks and their feedback. So some really interesting questions coming in. Questions such as an opinion there, which is right. It's really going to help the unbanked, where the economy and the state of the economy is not fully ready for high performance, high throughput payments, microtransactions. You're really going to see disruption that comes through with, and you need the stablecoin wallet structures. But you're also entering the era of agentic architectures, and so what you not only have is the full digitization of the payment infrastructure. You're also seeing the ability for microtransactions or automated transactions to occur from agentic architectures. And so, if you think of whether X402 or the protocols that now allow for these automated payments, Stephen, maybe you want to give us a little look ahead. What's coming? What should people who use payments just expect seamlessly, and what should we be looking forward to, maybe even with tokenization or agentic payments?
Look, I think for me, the really interesting thing is, how much of a technological leap is being made in like emerging economies, right? So, or developing economies, right? So if you think about like things like, the broader like telco basis, right? In places like the US, you went from, landlines to cell phones, et cetera, right? And in places like Africa, you never had, landlines, you went straight to cell phones. You have mobile money, right? That is a significant thing. People are comfortable with money existing on their devices, on their mobile devices for payments and for, custody in a way. And so what you're finding is that this idea of money on chain is not a very difficult concept for people to understand, right? Now, I think the point is that in some ways it's complicated to understand what blockchain, what wallet should I be using, et cetera. And I think that is where e-commerce platforms, fintechs, and banks have a role to play in providing an infrastructure that is trusted and secure to allow people to take advantage of the technology capabilities of blockchain, right? From our perspective as Fireblocks, we support 100 plus different blockchains. We have those capabilities already built into the wallet. So when a provider like a fintech or a payments company or a bank leverages the Fireblocks infrastructure, inherently they're providing access to all the assets and the blockchains that we support, so long as they want to turn those on. And so then it's really a question of how do you build a comprehensive UI UX that makes it simple for folks to interface with the assets that sit on the blockchain and the value that can be derived from these different flows, right? And so you can think about, remittance type payments, right? Remitly and others, where you can take a payment, you can take cash from your DDA account, you can swap it into a stable coin, and you can make a payment to someone else via a stable, and they can hold it in a stable or cash it out. And in places where like volatility of currency is significantly high, in those cases, they're holding on to those stable coins. And I think what we see as proof of this is the fact that stablecoin market cap has grown from 200 billion to about 270 billion. But the use cases around those would initially have had you think that you would see a lot more outflows, right? That in essence, if you're seeing more payments use cases, remittance use cases, cross-border payment like type use cases, then people would be getting a stable coin and they should be cashing out that stable coin into fiat, right? But what you're actually seeing is that there's a developing ecosystem around these stable coins where people can make contra payments via those stable coins. They can hold on to those stable coins to basically mitigate some of the risk associated with their local currencies. They can buy alternative assets, which keeps those stable coins floating within an ecosystem. And so I think that's really exciting. I think also if you look at the crypto trading space, you're already seeing AI being used for trading purposes, the ability for AI to interact with wallets and deploy capital into decentralized pools for trading. And I anticipate that you kind of see that broader scale out as well when it comes to kind of agentic type payments, right? So imagine, if you will, you have a platform that connects to your wallet. Your wallet can convert your fiat funds into a stable coin or a tokenized deposit. You can go on to an AI platform. You can say, hi, I want to buy X kind of asset or X kind of product. And then inherently you click buy, and the AI bot knows where your wallet is, can initiate a transaction on your behalf. You sign that transaction, you move the stablecoin to the e-commerce platform, they receive it, they ship your goods, they can hold on to the stablecoin or cash it out for fiat via bank and on and off ramp partner,
Yep.
right? And so what you start to get is these really interesting lines of efficiency that will start to come into space, and really a disruption of like some of the status quo around the different players that exist today that are providing kind of these financial services capabilities.
Stephen, I mean, absolutely fascinating insight there. I just want to, mindful of time, and I just want to call out a really important aspect of why we do these sessions. So the AWS Partner Network really invests with our partners to make it easy for you as a learner or you as a customer to get going on this journey. So, should you find any of the topics we covered today interesting, your organization is considering saying, hey, help us, let us do a guide us through this journey. We actually set up workshops. We call them game days or hackathons, and we walk through a scenario with real data, combining Fireblocks, AWS, our agent core architectures to show you what's possible. So we often publish these externally and into our partner network. So please consider registering for our trainings and our partner network as well. So just a quick shameless plug there, Jason, before we close out.
It's a good one, very on topic. And speaking of next steps that our viewers can take, Stephen, any closing thoughts? I know we have a QR code too as well, just to help guide our you can show it. Guide our viewers to that. But any closing thoughts you'd like to have?
Look, I think we're in a time of real interesting disruption in this space, but real interesting utility that can be created. And so I think it's important for everyone to think about how blockchain will impact their different business models. As you see the QR code on the page, you can go to www.fireblocks.com. We have a significant number of resources on the website around different case studies, around our platform, the tooling, and you can get in touch with our team to learn more about how you can leverage the Fireblocks platform to really engage in the digital asset space. So very excited to see what comes next.
Fantastic. Stephen, what a great conversation. So great that we went over time, which is always a good sign. We appreciate you coming on and sharing this insights, especially with such an interesting part of the industry. So
thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And with that, for our viewers, so what we're going to do is thank you for Stephen for joining. We're going to do a quick go to the graphic, and we'll be right back with our next guest from Temporal. So don't go away. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Industries Live. If you're just joining us, Industries Live is our show featuring AWS partners that is specific to various industry segments, and they're partners that work on interesting solutions that leverage AWS services and technologies and apply them to specific industry challenges, opportunities in unique and interesting ways. And we have them on our show, and we get to dive in to see what are they hearing within the industry, how are they building on AWS, and get those interesting insights and share them all with you. This is a financial services themed episode, and my name is Jason O'Malley. If you're just joining in, I'm a senior partner solutions architect, and I'm part of our industry partner solutions strategy team. And what Industries Live is, it's a show that airs every other week on Tuesdays at 8 a.m. Pacific. So mark your calendar, and also we'll put a QR code up as well. So that QR code will be able to, let me just cue that up. There it is. The QR code, if you click that, you'll be able to register and get notified when we have new episodes coming up. So make sure to register for that. And with that, I'll pass it off to my co-host, Addy, to introduce himself.
Thanks, Jason. Hey, folks, I'm Addy Dubhashi. I lead our industry solutions for financial services across the AWS partner network. So we really focus on working with our partners, our technology and consulting partners, to solve for line of business industry challenges. In some cases, it's like the episode we just had, which is a highly disruptive space, leverages ready-to-go platforms such as Fireblocks to solve for stablecoin wallets. On the other hand, you really need to build the first-party, third-party combinations of tools and systems you need to solve for modernizing your existing systems, making them ready for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And so with that, we've seen a lot of focus for customers to think about modernization in terms of a layered journey, one that containerizes their code, moves it to Kubernetes, building the data warehouses. And within that journey, you really need to use the latest tools that can help you across orchestration. And so I'm super excited today to have the Temporal team on the call.
Me too. And without further delay, I'd say let's welcome them on. So Rick and Connor, great to see you. Welcome
Likewise.
to the show.
Both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for joining. We'll go kind of in order on the screen. I'll say, Rick, do you want to say a quick hello and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Rick Ross. I'm a solution architect here at Temporal. And my role basically is to help introduce Temporal from a technology perspective. So I do a lot of demos, a lot of workshops. At the end of the day, I answer a ton of technical questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rick. And Connor, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Connor Lewis. I'm one of our account directors here at Temporal, focused on helping our financial services customers get up and running with Temporal and expand it across their business.
Fantastic. So nice to meet you both. And we didn't get the chance to really dive into Temporal. Would you like to set some stage about what Temporal does and its unique differentiation within the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think Addy, mentioned that as everyone's modernizing, adopting cloud, things are becoming more mission critical, being run in the cloud. Resiliency is really the name of the game, particularly for financial services. And so Temporal, albeit a relatively new company, our co-founders actually came from AWS. So we have some joint roots there. And they've been working on this problem around how do you manage distributed systems at scale and bring resiliency to the forefront. So the background is from developing solutions at AWS and Microsoft, and then moving over to Uber. They actually ran the orchestration engine, which handled all of the backend microservices, ultimately creating Temporal. But the crux of it is when you're adopting cloud solutions, everything becomes distributed. And in engineers' time, the way they provide value to the organization is really focused on business logic and creating new features and functions. And the plumbing code and around retries and resiliency and all of that logic becomes, a bit of a bog down in terms of delivery speed. And Temporal abstracts away all of the complexity around resiliency logic and retries and state and all of these sorts of things, and allows engineers to just focus on pushing the business logic and the features and functions, and ensuring that whatever they're developing is being done in a production-ready way. So that's what Temporal brings to the table. It's very exciting and is being adopted, wholesale across many of the large banks globally.
And it's a fascinating space you're in, because when you think about the existing stack that these large institutions have, we take them for granted, whether they're payments or capital markets instruments that are traded at these massive volumes. They've been working on these systems that are decades old now, and so as we look at the way they need to be modernized, they really have to take a leap ahead. Just before AWS, though I'm here for 7 years now, I was with a large bank, and a massive project they'd undertaken was about straight-through processing, and they had to untangle and unwind several systems in order to make sure that they're ready and building that system for the next 20 to 30 years. A lot of this comes down to the ability to do that level of complex orchestration to maintain that resilience. Tell us some of the stories, Rick, Connor. What have you all seen coming from customers, and what's those exact layers you play in financial services?
Yeah, well, there's lots of different stories. I think we'll speak about one here, which is in the payment space. So JP Morgan is one that's adopting Temporal across their commercial bank. But to your point, Addy, yeah, these systems are very old. They're very complex. Think about them as kind of like spaghetti-like in nature, where you have all these dependencies, and it just makes things very hard to make any changes. And of course, when you're dealing with financial services, payment has to go through, right? So there's a lot of focus and a lot of scrutiny on any sort of modernization or changes that happen to these systems. Temporal is able to meet these engineers in a very specific way, where you don't have to modernize the entire application all at once. You can kind of pick and choose service by service. So the idea around unwinding a monolith becomes much, much easier with something like Temporal. But the net result is resiliency. So anything that starts completes. And so one of the key metrics that I think really shines a light on the power of durable orchestration is payment completeness. So if you look at the before state, it was about 99.6% payment completeness. And you can imagine across trillions of dollars that number becomes pretty big in terms of the lost payments. With Temporal being the underlying kind of durable orchestration execution engine for those payments, resiliency has actually gone up to 99.99%. And in some situations, even up to 5 nines. So you can really see kind of the material business impact when you actually adopt a durable execution strategy. And at the same time, you look at developer productivity, and it absolutely goes through the roof. We have some other customers who used to plan for feature enhancements being on, a quarterly basis, doing so in less than a day now, because again, all of the abstraction that Temporal does takes away, the complexity and the plumbing and the resiliency logic, and allows the engineers just to focus on the business logic. And as soon as they write that, it's done in a production ready scale, so it can be pushed immediately.
It's interesting. Connor, you mentioned like obviously within financial services, the durability of data and the uptime is going to be so important. I'm curious too, when you talk about that and you talk about how it relates to AWS and integrates with AWS. I'd like to know more, like from a solutions architect perspective, and for the audience here that's interested, can you tell me more about how Temporal can be deployed at scale for those like really critical, mission critical workloads, and what does that look like when it does integrate into the environment?
Sure. So at its core, Temporal is a code-first platform. So developers control everything that they're writing. So they're orchestrating the business logic. They're calling APIs. They are doing what you would typically do in that business process for moving money around. And so the first part of it is using code. Then they containerize it typically and could deploy it in a number of places on AWS. So that could be EC2, EKS, or even Fargate. The other thing is that you can actually purchase Temporal Cloud through the marketplace, which allows companies to avoid the legal messiness, right? The paperwork that normally takes a long time. We can adopt those same terms there. And then lastly, as customers come on board to Temporal Cloud, they choose where they want the control plane to live. And so they can control AWS in specific regions. And in that way, they are usually utilizing everything within the AWS ecosystem.
I imagine just having that ability to sort of maintain some of that control within their environment. Rick, from your perspective, is that one of the key elements that really helps make the customers feel more comfortable about the integration point?
Yeah, absolutely. Because from a Temporal perspective, the code that you write always stays in your environment. It's just an outbound gRPC call to Temporal Cloud, where we're just orchestrating everything going on within your applications.
Makes sense. That makes sense.
And Rick and Connor, this might be because of the specific nature of how it solves for such a critical aspect of customers' challenge. But how do we position this to help customers discover this? Who's the persona you speak with? How does the journey begin? And what does it look like, step by step to show them that not only is this the right way to go, but there's a proven pattern of success that you've been seeing?
Yeah, it's a great question. We are open source by nature, so it is very easy to adopt and kind of learn Temporal. You can download it on your local machine and get your hands on it immediately. I would say that's a very common way for people to get exposure to Temporal. More focused to financial services specific, oftentimes we're engaging with engineering leaders who are running money movement applications or payment applications. And the way that we speak about Temporal is really threefold. The first order effect that we bring, the value driver, is really around resiliency and durability. And so that's bringing the payment completeness rates up. That's ensuring that your failure rates are dropping substantially. And that's a pretty easy thing to get behind. The second order effect is once you adopt Temporal, again, you're getting a much more simplistic backend. So your code base is actually shrinking. A lot of the code base, that around the resiliency code kind of goes away, and you don't have to manage that anymore. So developer velocity goes through the roof. Projects, time to value goes, astronomically, enhances, and so it starts to spread like wildfire. And then the third order effect is really end-to-end observability and auditability across these distributed transactions, which you can imagine for troubleshooting or for tracking of various different payment across these back-end systems in the current state is a very difficult challenge. And there's a lot of infrastructure built up at these organizations to do so. That comes natively out of the box with Temporal. So if you think about, first is durability, second is developer velocity, and then the third order effect is full end-to-end observability and auditability. And those three key drivers really move the needle, particularly within financial services.
I can see that. And I remember when we had the chance to kind of discuss earlier when we were preparing for the show, I remember there's some case studies you had mentioned where you're kind of really able take it up to the next level from the reliability, payment reliability standpoint and otherwise. Do you want to go a little bit deeper into those?
Yeah, absolutely, we can. So I think the JP Morgan case study is really a great one. So if you look at their commercial banking segment and the way they were moving money for real-time payments, the back-end infrastructure they had, again, was a bit hamstrung with the old school way of doing things. And there was a lot of infrastructure that they had built up to ensure reliability and completeness. But at the end of the day, there's limitations with those old school ways of doing things. So the net was they were doing about 99.6% payment completion rate on an annualized basis. They brought in Temporal, and again, they did this in a phased rollout where they're moving over service by service, and we're talking about these various different microservices that actually handle the payment transaction. They're writing them in Temporal using the Temporal SDK and the language of their choice. And leveraging Temporal's multi-region replication for high availability. So in the case of outages or failures within regions, there's an automatic failover. And ultimately, that has allowed them to achieve now a 4.9, potentially pushing into 5.9 realm for payment completeness rates. And so Temporal's handling things like the retries, timeouts, tracking state across all of these various different services. And then in the face of any sort of bugs that may be in code, identifying exactly where these bugs are, so the time to resolution goes immediately down to 0. There's no looking through logs anymore, so that whole old way of kind of troubleshooting is out the window, and it's all being surfaced in the Temporal UI and allowing you to seamlessly push any sort of code changes that are needed directly into the workflow. And again, we're managing the state of where that error occurred. So we pick up the transaction immediately where it left off without having to rerun any sort of process from the beginning. So things like compensating transactions, which are really important for payments or orders, become very, very simple to do in Temporal.
That's great. It's such an impactful, like to help resolve some of those loose ends that are like, to just like up level that reliability, even just that what would seem like a small amount, but just to get to that such a high level of confidence, it makes such a big difference, I would imagine.
Yeah, our boilerplate is code like you're in college, right? Where everything works. So essentially you're just writing whatever the business logic is that you want. Everything else is handled by Temporal. And that way, you can push it to production. It's going to run until completion, and you're going to get the resiliency directly out of the box.
Yeah. I'm wondering too, we've touched on the solution, but I'm wondering, I know you had some visuals that could help anchor into how it works, especially if folks aren't as familiar with some of the developer items. Would you like to go into those now?
Yeah, let's show slide 1 here.
Great.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide, please. So when you take a look at a traditional way that developers build modern applications, they spend the bulk of their time writing what we call plumbing code. And these are things that have already been mentioned, things like retry logic, things like reading and writing from message queues, handling the multi-threadedness to be able to scale to high volumes, and of course, managing state. And that just slows the effort down when you're trying to deliver real-world applications. And when you look at the same thing with Temporal, we flip this to say that business logic is really the important part, and that's where you should be focusing on. So in that way, I can go faster because all that plumbing code really becomes more policies. So instead of having to write complex loops to handle retries, what I actually can do is say, hey, here's my retry policy. I'm willing to wait up to 5 times or don't continue if I see specific errors. So on the third slide, then, if we dig into how this actually works, is on the left side we see a money transfer, very simple application with 4 steps: checking for fraud, withdraw, deposit, and notify. And it really looks as simple as is because we leverage the Temporal SDK and available in one of 7 different languages, whether it's Python, Go, .NET, Java, TypeScript, PHP, or Ruby. And you bundle this up, you run this on your own infrastructure, and it makes a gRPC long pull to a Temporal service. And inside the Temporal service, we're managing the state of the money transfer application. We're managing the retries in case APIs to downstream systems are unavailable, or maybe the network's a little flaky. We're managing durable timers, and we're managing queues. So in this way, queues really become an implementation detail, and you're not focused on the events or the message payloads and having to establish different topics on queues. So if we now go to the last slide, we see that how Temporal delivers durable execution, the outcomes of that are velocity. Because as a developer, I can focus on the business logic and not that plumbing code. So that enables me to spend more time delivering features that the business needs. When we speak about reliability, Temporal, what it allows you to do is not worry about what happens if that process dies. So if I'm in the middle of an execution of a payment process, and that actual process that's running dies, there would be a lot of code you'd have to put in there without Temporal. Temporal says, no big deal. I'll continue where you left off, and your payment transaction is going to run to completion. And finally, on the insight slide, you get great visibility into what happens when things go wrong. So gives you could see things like how many times things have been retried. You could see the last error, why it retried, and so forth.
Rick, I'm curious too, just when you're just talking to a new customer or someone's going to implement, I'm curious what are some of the common questions that you'll get from like developers or DevOps or tech teams that when they're thinking about shifting to this type of approach? Any common questions?
One common question is well, I can't use the cloud. How can I use your cloud? We have to keep all the data in our system. And there's a couple of different approaches. The most common one is to actually use a data converter. You can think of this as an interceptor. And so all the data going out of your application is encrypted with your own algorithmic keys. It goes up to Temporal, and then it comes back, goes through that same data converter, and decrypts it. So from a developer perspective, they just see the normal parameters. They don't even have to deal with that encryption. But from a security perspective, that we've got the data protected and encrypted for you.
So they can just focus on the benefits, but know it's compliant within their company's policies and everything. That makes a lot of sense.
And so maybe we have to what about extending this forward, right? So one of the big announcements we made with Agent Core was the ability to have those resilient agents that can always be up and running. So when you allocate a series of tasks to an agent and it starts getting into more critical systems, it must have that uptime and its availability operating abstracted away from kind of any a single infrastructure dependency, instead being totally serverless where possible. How does this fit in with Temporal? I actually think that it should be a baseline with any vibe coded program in the future.
Yeah, so we're in talks to see how we can make that better together story with Temporal and Agent Core. We have other partnerships, but you bring up a good point. When you think about agentic systems, at its core, it's just a distributed system. And that's why Temporal has such a strong playing here. And I'm sure Connor could add on to that as well.
Yes, we are engaged with many AWS customers, specifically around Agent Core and bringing that to life. To Rick's point, at the end of the day, a multi-agentic system is, again, just multiple systems talking to each other. So it's you're facing the same problems as a distributed system or microservices. So durable orchestration is most critical for ensuring that these agentic systems are actually able to deliver the value that they say they are in the face of failures. And if we're going to make strategic bets on agents, we need to know that they're going to work the way they should be working and do so reliably. So orchestration becomes a very important piece of an agentic strategy. So yeah, there's lots to be done there with Agent Core. And there's a very strong partnership between Temporal and AWS in terms of go-to-market working with customers. And if you just look at the broad landscape, I mean, essentially every single frontier model company is developing their agents on Temporal wholesale, which is very, very impressive. It also speaks to, kind of the second order effect of how do we actually make sure these agents are actually working in production at scale and can do so reliably. And that's the difference between kind of the POC, fun agent use cases we were talking about the last 2 years, and bringing agents to the world and having them do real world functions that we need to have trust and reliability around.
Great. I'm excited. Maybe we'll have to sync up again to talk about Agent Core and to see how that
We'd
goes
love to. Yeah.
next year.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we are coming in our closing minutes because the time always flies by with a great conversation. I'm curious, Connor and Rick, any sort of closing thoughts for the audience, and also call to action in terms of where you'd like them to go if they'd like to dive in deeper with Temporal?
Yeah, so Temporal's, if you're a developer and you're not using Temporal, do yourself a favor, go to temporal.io, take a look around at our website and get started. Because once you start using Temporal, you're not going to want to go back to the old way of doing distributed applications. It's simple as that.
Yeah.
I think we have a QR code for that too, by the way.
do.
We could point that just to make it extra easy for all of our streaming audience out there.
Fantastic. Yeah, it sounds too good to be true, but trust me, it's not. It's open source. Go get your hands on it. Also through the AWS Marketplace. We have, I think, some free credits that we're doing too, so it should be very easy for everybody to go and try out. Please reach out to us. Contact the Temporal team. We're here to help educate everybody and kind of spread the good word. And we also have a very vibrant community. You can find us on the Temporal Slack. Even our co-founders are in there interacting with various different users and customers. So drop us some questions, and we'd love to help get you onboarded onto Temporal and show you the light of what it really means to be reliable and durable, and not have to worry about the stuff that's kind of boring about coding. So focus on the fun stuff.
And I like that you added the plug for reInvent on there as well. So if there's any people in the audience that are going to reInvent in just a couple weeks' time, great chance to see Temporal in person. With that, we are about at time. So Rick and Connor, fantastic discussion. Thank you for just a great discussion. We had and covering all things financial services.
Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. And thank you, Addy, for co-hosting this great episode. And for everyone watching, this is our Industries Live show. So we'll be back in 2 weeks on an episode on media and entertainment. And we don't forget to click the QR code, and you can snap that and subscribe to it so you can get notified of our next episodes when they come. And with that, we will see you in 2 weeks. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you then.